give it up and turn it loose the way James Brown sang about it. That's a form of death. It could be a dogma of male supremacy. It could be a dogma of Jewish hatred, or Arab hatred, or Muslim hatred. It could be a dogma thinking that somehow an American baby has more weight than a baby in Guatemala. It could be a dogma of thinking that somehow those on the chocolate side of town might be catching hell, but your destiny somehow is not inextricably tied to their destiny. You can live in your gated community and somehow think as long as you stay in your bubble, you'll be able to make it from womb to tomb with some kind of sense of integrity, decency, and honesty. No, that is a lie. It may not be true at the moment in your life, but sooner or later, chickens come home to roost. Sooner or later, you're going to reap what you sow. Sooner or later, what's in the wash will come out in the rinse. That's what happened to the founding of the United States, right? Look at the U.S. Constitution. No reference to the institution of slavery. No reference to the fact that 22% of the inhabitants were enslaved Africans whose very labor generated the wealth that was a precondition for the experiment in democracy. Don't you think that sooner or later you're going to have to deal with this institution of slavery, even though you deny it at the very beginning? Well, Brother West, it was a conspiracy of silence among the founding fathers. They thought the issue was too complicated and therefore they left it out. Okay, I call it hypocrisy. I call it mendacity. I call it dishonesty. I call it indecency. I call it barbarity, bestiality. Not just because I'm a black man and it included my great-great-great-grandmama. It would be true if you were any color, of any slice of humanity, because slavery is a form of barbarism. That's the moral and ethical contract. And you end up fighting a civil war not invoked in your Constitution, over an institution not invoked in your Constitution. You say, lo and behold, who would have thought that 750,000 precious human beings would die in the most barbaric of all civil wars of modern times over these black peoples, what their status is. And that's the reason why anytime you talk about justice, it's always useful to begin with those who are catching the most hell. Indigenous peoples, peoples of color, women, gay brothers, lesbian sisters, our Puerto Rican brothers and sisters still a colony to this very day. Puerto Rico looks very much like Detroit. And both of them are canaries in the mine when it comes to America. What the rest of America could very well look like if we continue on the same path, the same neoliberal path obsessed with financialization of the economy, with big banks dominating. 42% of all profits in America go to the top banks on Wall Street, and yet if you talk about it, people call you a communist. I don't care what you call me. I'm trying to keep track of the suffering. I'm trying to keep track of the sources of social misery. 1% of the population owns 44% of the wealth. 22% of America's children live in poverty, in the richest nation in the history of the world. I find that morally obscene and spiritually profane. And I don't care what color those children are. When you talk about children of color, it's 40%. And you talk about the new Jim Crow in the last 2 generations, $1.5 trillion spent as a Marshall Plan for the new Jim Crow, not for jobs with a living wage, not for decent housing, not for quality education. That's warped priorities, and yet that is what we have witnessed in our recent past. There's not a whole lot of talk about it. Don't we think that chickens will come home to roost? Climate change, ecological catastrophe. Philippines is just the peak of an iceberg. How long can we remain in what Henry David Thoreau called our sleepwalking? What do we do, as he says in that epigraph of that great classic of 1854, Walden? What do we do to wake our neighbors? Well, LaSalle in tradition has a response. He said it's like the conclusion of a practical Aristotelian syllogism. It's not a proposition. It's a way of life. It's the way you live your life. It's the choices that you make. Visions, the virtues, the sense of integrity, the decency, the honesty. But all of those phenomena are being marginalized in our market-driven neoliberal capitalist society.